Hey y'all, welcome. This is a super impromptu live. As you can see, I'm at my daughter's house, getting ready for wedding week. And but today there's so many developments that I just had to pop in for a half an hour or so to chat and to maybe answer a few questions. I actually am not sure whether we're going to have a moderator or not, so please bear with me if I'm pulling questions. Um, as you can see, I'm working on my laptop. My lighting's not great, but I'm here and we need to chat about what happened today. So, um, the prosecution uh, did a little housekeeping to begin with. They offered the evidence. They got the evidence in from the notorious loin fire text messages. I felt bad that the poor FBI agent had to actually sit there and read them into the record, which was awkward. But nonetheless, they got that all done. And then the prosecution, they had a little bit of a sidebar. So here's what's going on. A couple of things came up. One, the prosecution asked to amend the indictment. Now, the indictment is the document that charges and it is a very important document because it gives um, the defendant, trying to turn around here so that we get a little bit less glare off the window, puts the defendant on notice of what they're being charged with. So it's very important. And it's a little bit unusual for the prosecution at the 11th hour to be asking to amend the indictment. I agree that there were some questionable calls there. And I am concerned that Michelle, my moderator, is calling me right now. So I am going to text her and let her know that we're live. So there were some questionable calls I was a little concerned about. And I think that the defense was smart to say, we're going to take that up with the appeals court. So the judge did allow them to amend the indictment and change a couple of statute references, which is a problem. I need to pop out for just a second. I'm so sorry. This is what happens when we do impromptu lives. I had to pop out for a minute to get Michelle in on the stream so she could do the moderating. So sorry about that. Um, so um, this is, I think they were smart to, first of all, to say we're going to take that up with the appeals court. I do have some concerns about how that's going to go. Doing a revision of the charging document just before the prosecution rests is a little risky. And as the defense pointed out, they had been asking for a revised indictment for quite some time. Now, there have been challenges to this indictment that came early on from both John Pryor and from Lori's prior attorney. The problem is that that the court has sealed all those documents, so we don't actually know what the challenges were and whether they are related to these latest changes. So we're going to have to wait to see what the appeals court says about that, and wait until we get some of the documents unsealed, which I hope will happen once the trial is over. So, so the next thing that happened was the prosecution said they were going to rest, and then the defense moved for a judgment of acquittal. It's called different things in different states. It's sometimes called a judgment notwithstanding the judgment on the evidence. So here's the thing about a motion for acquittal. It comes when you have heard the defense or the prosecution's case, and what the defense is saying is, we don't believe that the prosecution has presented sufficient evidence for a jury to be able, for it to go to the jury, for the jury to deliberate on the facts. It's an interesting motion because the rule is that the judge has to construe the facts in the way most favorable to the prosecution, because remember, they have the burden of proof. So before a judge could say, yes, there's simply not enough evidence to support a conviction, so I'm going to give you a judgment of acquittal, before it ever goes to the jury, it has to be very clear that there was not enough evidence. I don't think they hit that in this case. And I see Julie Reichart is in the chat. Thank you so much, Julie. Julie has been in court every day, pinch hitting for me because I'm in LA doing wedding week. So I am going to post some photos as we go along throughout the week in the comments and on Twitter, because we're having a blast. The mother of the groom took the bride and I out for a gorgeous afternoon tea at the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills, where we had the most amazing tea and a little champagne along with our tea. And so that really kicked off, was so special, kicked off wedding week. And now we have a whole week of things coming up. So we've got a lot to do today and tomorrow to get ready. And then Thursday kicks off the out-of-town family are getting together on Thursday, and then we're off. So, but this was way too important for me not to get on today and to chat a little bit about what's going on. So now the next thing that happened was the prosecution said we rest. The defense said we want a judgment of acquittal. And the judge said he was going to take that under advisement. Now, that's not at all unusual, because the judge really does have to look back at all of the elements that are required to prove the case, and look back at whether or not the evidence supports has proven each and every element of each and every count. It is possible that the judge could say you proved count 1, but you didn't prove count 2, or vice versa. So it's possible that the judge could say you didn't prove all of the elements of all of the counts, so we're going to throw out some of the counts. It's also possible that the judge could say, no, the state proved, if we take the evidence in the light most favorable to the prosecution, they have proven their case and sufficient for it to go to the jury. Now, this does not mean that the judge is saying Lori is guilty. He is simply saying that there is sufficient evidence to pass it on to the jury, who is the finder of fact, to determine whether or not Lori is guilty or innocent of any or all of the charges. So we don't know. So my understanding is that that we're off for today, and that tomorrow the court is going to get together with the lawyers and work through all the jury instructions. Now, anybody who watched the recent Letitia Stout trial or the Murdaugh trial knows that jury instructions are so important to the case. They really are the roadmap the jury uses and the rules that the jury uses when they are applying the law to the facts. And so it guides their deliberation, and it's very important to get them right. So usually what happens is at the beginning of the trial, both sides submit their proposed jury instructions. Now every state has a set of uniform jury instructions. They're instructions that are put together by a panel of lawyers and judges, and they are the standard language. But every judge has the flexibility to change those jury instructions depending on the case. So often what happens is we start with those basic jury instructions. And then what we do is the judge and the prosecution and the defense will get together and ask for perhaps additional jury instructions. Perhaps they want to tweak the language a little bit. They want some sort of changes in the structure of the jury instruction. And then ultimately what happens is the court then will take all of those jury instructions, and they literally sit down in front of the jury, and the judge will read those jury instructions to the jury. Now, the jurors usually get a printed copy of those jury instructions as well that they can refer to when they go back to deliberate. Now, every single one of those exhibits is going to go to the jury, and that includes all of those voluminous jury records where we saw bits and pieces of them. They have all of them. They're going to be able to go through them. I would not expect that this is going to be a quick verdict, because there is a lot for them. There are a lot of counts, and there is a lot for them to consider. So I would not necessarily expect that this is going to be a speedy, a la Alec Murdaugh kind of a verdict. I don't even think that it will happen as quickly as the Letitia Stout did. Remember that in both of those cases, the counts that they had to consider were much fewer. So in this case, we've got 11 different counts between conspiracy to commit murder for Tylee, for JJ, for Tammy, plus we have insurance and banking fraud and those sorts of counts as well. So I really think that we're looking at a more prolonged jury deliberation. Now, one of the things that I wanted to point out is that the defense decided not to call any witnesses, and that's a tactical decision. If the defense had made a motion for a judgment of acquittal, and the judge had said, I'm not going to give you a judgment of acquittal, and they had said, okay, then we're going to put our defense on. Essentially, they waived the appeal on a judgment of acquittal. So if the defense feels strongly that the prosecution has not proven their case, they're better off to rest and not to put on a defense, because they have, but then it means they have to rely on the fact that the appellate court is going to agree that the prosecution didn't meet their burden, and that there should have been an acquittal. So no, we don't have a verdict. Somebody just asked verdict. No, we don't. The case has not even gone to the jury yet. We think that the court will do jury instructions tomorrow, or they're going to work with the defense and God, I gotta spit it out here. They're going to work with the lawyers to determine what jury instructions are going to be given and which ones are not. and then they're going to, then they'll reconvene on Thursday to instruct the jury. So I would say if this goes to the jury on Thursday afternoon, then we'll probably see a verdict next week. I would be very surprised if we see a verdict by Friday. So I think and I actually expect that the jury's going to deliberate for a while, but I could be wrong. I mean, I would never have expected that the Murdoch jury was going to come back in less than 3 hours. So I could be really wrong. But there is a lot of discovery to go through. So the reason I wanted to do this was just to get online and answer some quick questions. So let's try and pick up some questions. If Michelle, if you are available to do that, let's start pulling some questions so that we are catching up with everybody. Ah, there you are. Hi, Michelle. I'm so glad you're here. This was so impromptu. I hadn't even quite gotten an answer from her that she was going to be available. So I figured I could pull some questions on my own if I absolutely had to. But bless you, Michelle, you're there. Good, Lori. If you were a juror in this matter, would you vote to convict Lori Vallow? You know, I think I would have a little bit of trouble with some of the connections, although I think they made a really big improvement with the last couple witnesses. I think I might have a little trouble connecting the conspiracy as it applies to JJ and Tylee, although I think they did a much better job of pulling that in the last day or so. I don't think there's any question on Tammy. And what would be really persuasive for me would be the conversation that she had with Chad on the night that Lori was shot at, or that Tammy was shot at, about how Alex couldn't do anything right. It's clear from that conversation that there was a conspiracy and there was agreement on what was going to happen. Lori was in the loop on that one. So I would find no problem in finding that she conspired to murder Tammy. I think it's a little murkier when it comes to Tylee and JJ, although I do think that they started to really make that connection when they were talking about how she was talking about complaining about having to raise demons and how difficult it was, and how they just needed to be gone. So I do think that was a little more persuasive. But good question. I think I would certainly be able to easily convict her on the conspiracy to murder Tammy and on the bank fraud and the insurance fraud counts on those. Certainly wouldn't have any trouble in convicting her on any of the financial crimes because it's very clear that she took Tylee's money even before Tylee was dead. She was taking Tylee's money, and then I wouldn't have any trouble with that. And certainly she was receiving her Social Security benefits after she died, and same for JJ. So the financial, I think that's not even a question. So I really would feel like I needed to go back and look at some of that evidence that came in the last day or so before I could make a really clear sort of, yes, I see the connection here. Now, one of the things I'm working on and will continue to work on and get out as soon as it's ready is a newsletter that will actually go through the elements for each count, what needs to be proven, and then we'll really take a look at the evidence, the actual evidence. So we'll be kind of doing the same process that the jury will be doing in deliberation. So I'm trying really hard to get that out in the next day or so that you'll be able to follow along as the jury's deliberating. So, and I hope that will be helpful to be able to look at that. So, next question. What is the difference between submitting something as evidence versus submitting something as an exhibit as far as the jury is concerned? What are they able to use? Okay, this is a good question. So anytime that either side says, "I want to present this document or this information as an exhibit. I want to offer exhibit 12." And exhibit 12 then is they have to tell what exhibit 12 is and why it's authentic. And if the judge says, yes, it's admitted, then anything that has been offered as an exhibit goes to the jury. Now, the difference is that there are some times that they have done what they call demonstrative exhibits. So these are exhibits that are made just for the purpose of demonstration or a summary information. Excuse me, information. So when that happens, let's say that one of the now we saw this in the Letitia Stout case recently. In closing arguments, they put up these charts, and the charts had a photograph of who the text was coming from, and then the text message, and then the answer, so that the jury could see this timeline of messages from each one of the people, Letitia and her husband and her daughter, and anyway, um, that that is not evidence. That is demonstrative evidence or summarizing the evidence. The actual evidence is the text message. So in this case where we had, for example, we had an exhibit that came in early, and it was an interactive exhibit that showed that that had to do with the GPS data. And so it showed a satellite view of the area, and then where all the little pinpoint dots were, and then you could click on a pinpoint dot and that message would come up. That actual interactive piece is not evidence. What is evidence is the data from that pinpoint. Hopefully that makes sense. So in the case where they're saying, okay, we have GPS information that Alex Cox was in the church parking lot on this day. What proves that is the data. What the evidence, the demonstrative exhibit is just to illustrate the evidence. So in those cases, you would say, well, that PowerPoint isn't the evidence. The PowerPoint just makes the evidence easier to understand, because now we can see it on a satellite picture, and now we can see the timeline, or we can see how it goes logically. So the jury just gets a caution saying this demonstrative evidence isn't the evidence that proves that fact. So that interactive PowerPoint doesn't prove that Alex Cox was in the church parking lot the night that Tammy Daybell died. What proves that is the actual data that was pulled out of his cell phone, the raw data. So the judge will give them an instruction that they can't use that PowerPoint to prove the evidence, that they actually have to look at the raw data. Hopefully that makes sense. But everything that is offered into evidence and gets an evidence number goes to the jury. And that includes all of those thumb drives that had all the massive information on them. They're going to be able to access those on a computer in the jury room. They're going to be able to look at the photos and the videos and all of that stuff. They're going to be able to read every text message if they want to. But logically, they're going to go to the messages that the prosecution highlighted, because I'm sure they're going to feel like those are the most relevant and persuasive bits of evidence. So so anything that has been an exhibit and has an exhibit number is evidence that's going to go to the jury. And so they get to look at all of it. The question is, how much of it do they feel they really need to look at? before they can make a decision. Good questions, guys. I'm telling you what, you guys have really great legal questions, because we've been learning together about this case and about the law for a while. So, hey, it's really nice to see folks here from Australia. Um, I'm just seeing Aussie girls here from Australia, and it's so nice to have you all here. And hopefully, impromptu lives, you guys can catch those. Here you all had about 20 minutes to figure out that we were having a live, and we've got 650 people in chat. So thanks for following along with us and coming on this journey. Jennifer M, question: how damaging were all these risque text messages back and forth? Well, I think they showed a level of intimacy between the two of them that, um, I think our society has sort of had some changing opinions about affairs and about marital fidelity, but it is very clear that Lori and Chad's beliefs on both sides required that they be that they be true and faithful to their spouses, each of whom they had married in the temple and been sealed to. And so I think that I think to a large extent, it goes a bit to motive, being able to say these people wanted to be together so desperately that they were willing to kill people to do it. We've heard Lori say, Chad couldn't just get a divorce because he'd be ruined in the church. So there's a lot of sort of persuasive information in those sort of risque text messages, those really intimate messages. I don't think that the prosecution was offering them simply because they were titillating. Don't you love that word? I do. I don't think they were offering them just for that sort of shock titillation value. I think they were offering them to show a motive that that these folks were so desperate to be together that they were willing to do anything to be together, and that they used um, a lot of these strange beliefs as justification. The idea that their loved ones were zombies now as justification for getting rid of them. I think that some of the text messages we heard today about, take the children out, please God, take the children out because I'm over it. I'm done with raising demons. I think that's some pretty damaging text messages that came out today. So, question: do you think there's enough for the appellate court to give Lori a new trial? I think it is possible. All I can say at this point is I think that there are sufficient issues that the appeals court could determine that she should get a new trial. But I also want to point out something that Scott Reich pointed out on his show a day or so ago, and that's that the appellate court um, routinely grants a new trial to less than 20% of people. Oh, I think it's more like 2%. Only about 2% of cases nationwide get new trials on appeal. So while I think that it is possible, I think that it's an uphill battle for them, but it's been an uphill battle ever since the day that she was arrested. So yeah, I think that it's possible that there is enough with the issues that are being presented. So issue on the correction of the indictment, issue on the 404B information coming in, issue on her speedy trial rights. I mean, if you stack those up, it's the more issues there are for the court to look at, the more opportunities there are for the court to say, yeah, it needs to go back down to the trial court level and be retried. I think it's possible. How probable it is? Well, I think more than 2%, but I would say, I don't know, maybe she's got a 20 to 30% chance of actually getting the appeals court to grant her a new trial. Good questions, you guys. You're getting to be such legal beagles. Hi, Bo Peep. Do you think Chad's going to use the whole "I was framed" still? I think that is getting more and more difficult for him to maintain that argument. I think a lot of the text messages that came out make it harder for him to really stand by that. And um, Victoria Tabor says, "I swear I would have pled guilty before being embarrassed by the loin fire and the storm texts." Yeah, I do think it is much more difficult for Chad these days to be able to bring that to be able to back up that claim, "I was framed." We all thought it was sort of far-fetched knowing that the kids' bodies were found in his backyard. However, but I felt from the beginning that Chad really took on that argument because he was still claiming that he wanted his children to believe that. I think he was trying to make his kids believe that. And it's clear that at least Emma did, because she went on national TV and said he was framed, and he had an emotional affair with her. And we see the text messages now that they were meeting when he said he was at conferences. They were meeting at hotels, and those text messages are fairly explicit if you understand their pet names for things. That they were meeting in hotels and having sex. So I think it's pretty hard at this point to justify to his children, we were just having an emotional affair, and you know, I was totally taken in by a beautiful woman, and I didn't do anything wrong. I think it is going to be really tough for him to continue to make that argument. So will Lori and Chad be able to communicate once the trials are done? It's likely that they will be able to communicate. Usually they are able to communicate by letter, unless the court specifically orders that they have no contact with one another because they are still co-defendants. So that is really going to depend on the judge. The judge could say, you can have no contact ever with your co-defendant. You two are too toxic and you can't ever have contact with one another. But if the judge doesn't specifically do that, then they would be able to do that. However, they would be all their communication would be monitored. So what value it would have for them to be able to send one another love letters, I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know how they feel about one another now, 3 years later. So good questions, guys. Does it matter whether she's convicted of the murder charges or conspiracy charges, or both? Don't they each carry a life sentence? They do in Idaho. In Arizona, it's a little bit different, but she is only charged with conspiracy in Charles Vallows' death in Arizona. In Idaho, they both carry the same same sentence. So either way, she could be sentenced to life without parole. Hi, Trisha the Trucker. Where are you? I hope that you are somewhere warm and beautiful. I feel like Chad's pride is going to keep him from admitting he's wrong, but his cowardice, who wants him to plead to get his cowardice who want him to plead to get death off the table. Which one do you think is stronger? You know, I really do think that based on, um, I really do think that based on what we've seen so far, um, I think his attorneys will be working hard to get death off the table. I think that there is a valid equal protection and due process complaint to be made if death comes off the table for her and not for him. So and you know, the bottom line is I don't think the prosecutors want to try this case a second time. It's exhausting. Not that they won't, but I think they'd rather not. So I think there's a 50-50 chance that he is going to plead to get death off the table. It makes complete sense. But I don't know. He could. Will Lindsay give closing arguments? Now, she gave the opening and did a good job. This one's hard to say. If I had to guess, I would guess that Rob Wood's going to give the closing, but I could be wrong. She is the DA of the county where the charges originate. And I think it will be completely up to her to make that decision. But they probably will do it as they will probably put together the closing arguments, sort of the roadmap, the outline of the closing arguments together. And then they as a group will decide who's going to deliver the closing. If I had to guess, I would think it's going to be Rob Wood, but it could be wrong. So, Lisa Jacobs, if Lori is convicted and it is overturned on appeal, would Judge Boyce automatically be the presiding judge for a retrial? Good question. As long as he is the primary judge in Fremont County, which he is, then I would presume that that he would preside over a retrial. Trisha the trucker says she is driving through a storm in Kansas. Damn, here I was hoping you were somewhere sunny in the South. It's been a long winter, so I'm sorry. Be safe, Trisha the trucker. We need you out there. I would expect that Judge Boyce would be presiding over a retrial. What a wild ride this has been. Glad to have such good guides. Thank you so much, Kathleen, and thanks for your donation. As you all know, all of your super chats and PayPal donations go directly to our moderators. So thanks for that. Will the kids get a funeral after Lori's verdict or after Chad's trial? You know, that is up to the prosecution. I really think that their case is cemented enough that what they really need to do is release the kids' bodies so that Larry and Kay, along with Colby and whoever else in Lori's family, can finally give them a resting place together. It's my understanding that at some level the family has agreed that they need to be together. And so I hope they can come together and make that decision. I cannot imagine the pain this family has gone through, and I know how much they really need the closure. So I hope so, and I hope that Rob Wood will and the prosecution will finally understand how important it is and how little they have to gain by not releasing the kids' bodies. Great questions. How fast will Arizona schedule their trial after the verdict? Oh, good question. So the first thing that would happen is that Lori would be arraigned on their indictment, because remember, she has still not been arraigned. So her speedy trial, the statute of limitations, her speedy trial rights, all of those things don't run until she's actually indicted. So the next step would be for her to be indicted. That likely will happen over Zoom. They'll probably do that by a video conference, and then they will determine whether or not she's going to be moved to Arizona for trial. I suspect that if she is convicted here, Arizona might hold off. I think all along they have felt that the charges in Arizona are going to be sort of a backstop to the charges in Idaho, and so they may very well want to wait and see whether or not the appellate court is going to grant review, and whether there's going to be an opportunity for appellate for a new trial in Idaho, because they really want those Idaho charges to remain sort of as a backup. And so I wouldn't suspect that you will see that move really fast, because I think they'll want to wait to see what the appellate court's going to do. And there's really no rush. Everything is sort of told until she's actually indicted on those charges. Good questions, guys. Why did Boyce send everyone out of the court? Could they not have taken Lori out of the room into a secluded location to meet? Yeah, they could have, except that I think that Judge Boyce wanted that on the record. There are things that are important to put on the record. One of the things that is important to put on the record is a colloquy, a discussion, an inquiry about whether or not Lori understands her rights and the right to testify and the absolute right to remain silent. So generally, the judge will conduct an inquiry with the defendant. You might remember that from Murdoch. I think that inquiry was a little bit abbreviated because Judge Newman said to him, "You are a lawyer and you understand your rights and you understand the law." But still, there is usually that inquiry into, do you understand the law? Do you understand that you have the right to remain silent? You have an absolute right not to incriminate yourself. And do you understand that it is entirely your decision whether you testify or don't? So I think he probably cleared the courtroom so that he could do that inquiry on the record. But I don't know, because I wasn't there, and the people who were there got shooed out of the courtroom. So I'm not entirely sure what that was all about. But I will listen to the recording and I'll see whether I can divine any more information out of it. So, what is the statute of limitations on conspiracy to commit murder? You know, I don't know in Arizona. In most states, there is no statute of limitation on murder. I don't know whether that applies in Arizona to conspiracy. Now, in Idaho, because in Idaho, it carries the same sentence as murder, it has the same statute of limitations. But I'm not sure in Arizona what the statute of limitations would be on a conspiracy to commit murder, but I'll look that up. We have over 1,000 people in chat for an impromptu surprise live in the middle of the day. So thanks for joining us. Question from Ray: does the defense not presenting a case in chief increase the chance of a successful appeal on effective assistance of counsel in the case? No. And here's the reason. There is a tactical reason why they decided not to present a case, and that has to do with not waiving their claim that the prosecution did not prove their case. And so not wanting to waive that challenge means that they wouldn't put on a case. So no, I think that was a reasonable and educated, practical, tactical decision on the part of the defense. Understand that ineffective assistance of counsel is a really hard thing to prove. The reason it is because it's a two-step process. First of all, you have to prove to the appellate court that your attorney functioned at a lower level than is reasonable and that you would expect in the legal community. Okay. So the first step is you have to prove that their performance was substandard. But in addition to that, after you prove that their performance was substandard, you still have to prove that but for their poor performance, the outcome would have been different. So in this case, in order for her to claim ineffective assistance of counsel, she would have to prove that her attorneys were so subpar that she would have been found not guilty had they just done their job. And I don't see that. I don't see it. I see that they put on a rather lackluster defense, in my never humble opinion. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that it rises to the level of them putting on a substandard performance. So I don't see an ineffective assistance of counsel claim in this case, and I absolutely do not see it ever succeeding on appeal. I think it's way remote. But I do see that there is law to support some challenges based on changes to the indictment, lack of speedy trial, and of course on the 404B character evidence coming in. So good questions though. It's always a remains to be seen. What happens if she's found incompetent in Arizona? Will they just send her back to Idaho until she's competent to a prison instead of a psychiatric facility? Well, if she's found to be incompetent in Arizona, they will have a choice. They will have a choice to decide whether or not to send her to a state facility to be restored to competency, or whether to delay and allow her to start her prison sentence in Idaho and figure out whether or not she becomes competent. They can stay it either way. If she is proven that if she is found to be incompetent in Arizona, it would make sense for them to say, we want her restored because we want to go forward with our charges. Charles Vallow deserves that. But I don't expect that's going to happen, frankly. There's a couple things I think that come into play here. One is, if you recall, late last year, her attorneys once again raised the issue of her competency, and she had another evaluation, and the court found her competent, and that was based on that most recent evaluation after she had been in treatment for 10 months and then been in jail for a few months. I just don't see them backtracking and suddenly she's not competent again. I suspect that she will continue to be competent as long as she receives the medications that she's supposed to. And she'll continue to receive her meds in prison, because they don't do well with psychiatric patients. So they're going to want her to stay on her meds, so she's not going to decompensate and end up having to be a problem in the jail. Oh, good question. My thoughts on a televised verdict. I thought this was a really interesting development, considering how weird, and I will say it, how weird Judge Boyce has been about all the media and telephones in the courtroom and keyboards and all. I mean, he's been ridiculous about it. I found it really surprising that he's decided to televise the verdict when it comes. I think it was a smart decision, because I think it's going to take some pressure off the courthouse. And it also is going to mean that it's going to be much easier for them to convene a verdict once a verdict is reached, because they are not going to have to delay because of people not being there. I think it also is a nod to the families to allow them to see the verdict remotely, and I think that was it was a nice gesture. Although I feel really bad that the families were not able to have a live stream for themselves. So, I mean, I'm happy to hear that the verdict is going to be televised. I do think that it makes it more likely that Chad's trial is going to be televised, with the judge saying, our biggest concern was pretrial publicity. Well, it's already all out there. There's nothing that's going to come in that isn't already out there. So I think that it's sort of, if Chad goes to trial, I think it's more likely that his case will be televised. So good question. It's going to be interesting. What did it mean when the defense kept objecting, saying argumentative? Oh, good question. So when you are giving evidence, you can't pose it in a way that makes it sound like you are arguing the point. So there were times when Rachel Smith would would pose a question in a way that wasn't exactly leading, but it did make it sound much more like an argument um, uh, of almost like closing argument, that she was actually, rather than presenting the evidence and presenting it so that the jury could make up their mind, she was actually asking the witness to make sort of a value judgment about the evidence. And you can't do that. And there were times that she was inviting the witnesses to make some value judgments about the evidence rather than just presenting it. And those were things like, why did you think, why would you think that piece of that text message was important to the investigation? What did you think about that? And there were times that it sort of tipped over into getting the witness to argue that about what the evidence means. And that's something that you can't really get at. You can't ask the witness, what does that mean? Because that is a judgment that the jury has to make. The jury has to decide what that piece of evidence means in the grand scheme. So, for example, in the text messages, there were a lot of times where she would say, what did you get from that? What did you figure out from that? Or what did you surmise from that? And those are questions that are not answered by the witness, but by the jury. I mean, it's right for her to say, how did that piece of information lead you to the next piece of information in the investigation? What did that text message tell you what did that make you look for? That's a reasonable question. But asking, what did you think about that piece of information? That's an impermissible question. So that would draw that argumentative objection. We have over 1,100 people in chat for this very quick, impromptu, and not great, well organized until Michelle got here, thank goodness, live. So I appreciate that we're having the opportunity um, to chat. Karen, which attorney was most impressive to you? I would have to say Lindsay Blake for a variety of reasons. And some of them not necessarily about her performance in court. First of all, the poor woman's father died unexpectedly the first week of trial. And to be able to come back from that and mentally compartmentalize and be able to come back from that and focus her attention just on this trial she's been preparing for 3 years, I thought was very impressive. She's very organized. She's very she does a good job of thinking quick on her feet, which is important when you're responding to an objection. She's not she's not super charismatic, but none of them are. I mean, they're not the kind of people that the jurors are kind of leaning forward and going, what's he going to say? I mean, she's not Creighton Waters. I thought, from the Murdoch trial, I thought Creighton has a great um, combination of being just a little bit enough of a showman to keep the jury's attention, but still being super professional and very well organized and very well prepared. Um, so Lindsay's not a Creighton Waters, but I think she did an excellent job. Um, I don't, uh, I don't think, but I don't think any of them did a terrible job. I can't honestly say watching any of them that I thought, ooh, that made me cringe, or ooh, Um, to say that the defense counsel was lackluster, I think is a very good description for them. They weren't horrible, but they certainly did not have a fire in the belly for the defense of their client either. And so my vote has to, if we are electing an MVP, mine has to be Lindsay. Followed by the deputy in the courtroom. I think his name is Renner, who has done a great job of putting up with 5.5 weeks of a challenging trial. Wouldn't the defense use of the word crap in cross of Audrey be considered badgering the witness? No, just inappropriate. I mean, I get it. And I will say that that judges are very different about, judges vary in the way that how much they'll tolerate. But frankly, I would never have said that in court. And believe me, there have been many times that I've been tempted. But, I mean, there also have been times when I'm quoting a witness or something that comes out of a text message when I'm using the language that the witness used. So I think the judge was correct in saying not okay. I think that the judge's job is not only to call strikes and balls when you're talking about being in front of a jury, but also to insist on respect and decorum for the process. And I think that's critical to our system. If we want jurors to take seriously their responsibility to decide weighty issues of life and liberty, then we need to provide them with an environment that is respectful and professional. So, I mean, yeah, I don't think crap was badgering the witness, but I think it surely showed his frustration and I think that it was a little bit, uh, just diminishing, by saying, "Oh, well, that's just crap." That's a way of saying it's unimportant information, sort of telegraphing that to the jury that it's sort of, you know. And I don't really think that it was an appropriate comment on the evidence. Let's put it that way. I don't think that he should be commenting on the evidence in that way. So. And I did see a comment here about Charles Manson used language. There are a lot of defendants and witnesses who use colorful language in the court, but that's not the point. The point is that lawyers should be held to a higher standard, I think. Which witness or piece of evidence was the most impactful in my opinion. I have to say Zulema, because she was really the one who sort of began to give us some insight about the beliefs in this group. And I also think her information about Lori's phone call with Chad the night that Alex shot at Tammy Daybell was huge. I don't think you can minimize that piece of testimony, because I think that really cemented the conspiracy. So I agree. I think Zulema probably was the most impactful. I don't know. What do you all think? Can Chad publish books and other writings while in jail? Yes, he can. And inmates have and do publish from prison. However, Idaho has a slayer statute, also called a son of Sam statute. And what that means is that he cannot profit from his crimes. He could write fiction forever. He can continue to write his doomsday fiction from now until doomsday. But he can't write about and profit from his crimes. So, excellent questions. Trish Norman, Idaho does not have the insanity defense, but can it be used for sentencing? Yes, this is a great question. Just as there is, when you have a death penalty case, you have a mitigation phase. So if you'll recall, while the death penalty was on the table, we were expecting that we were going to get a guilt or innocence phase that was going to take 5 or 6 weeks, and then another 2 weeks in the sentencing phase. And at the sentencing phase, what happens is the mitigation expert starts presenting information about how the defendant was raised, what their life experiences were like, whether or not they have any medical conditions, whether or not they have any organic brain damage, whether or not they've had any emotional issues, and any of those things. And the same thing happens on a much smaller scale in a sentencing. So the next thing that will happen is there will be a pre-sentence investigation done, which is done by a representative from the state. It's usually somebody associated with parole and probation. They do a pre-sentence investigation and they send a report to the judge. So that gives the judge any sort of mitigating factors that might come into play, and the judge takes that into consideration when he is determining sentence. So Idaho still has determinate sentencing, so it is possible that she could be sentenced to a period of incarceration with the possibility of parole. I doubt seriously that that will happen, but that is the reason for the pre-sentence investigation. So the other question is, what will happen to Lori after there's a verdict? If she's found not guilty, she will be immediately released. If she's found guilty, she will go back to Fremont County, where she will wait until that pre-sentence investigation is done. Usually take 30 to 60 days. So she'll stay in county until she's sentenced. Once the sentence is passed, is imposed, then she'll go to state prison. So Lee here, it looks like you just joined us. No, we do not have a verdict. What happened today, just to recap for anybody who might have just joined us, is that the defense decided not to present any witnesses. They presented a motion for acquittal. The judge took that under advisement. The prosecution rested. The defense decided not to call any witnesses. A motion for judgment of acquittal must be decided taking the evidence into the light most favorable for the prosecution. So it's unlikely the judge is going to say, no, your prosecution, your case was so deficient that we're not even going to send it to the jury. I'm just going to acquit her. It happens very rarely, but it's something that has to be done, or it can be appealed. So, so that happened. The judge ended court early today, said tomorrow that he's going to meet with the lawyers and they're going to go over jury instructions. It's likely that we're going to get closing arguments and jury instructions on Friday. Let me see. No, sorry. Today's Tuesday. Wednesday, tomorrow, they will be doing jury instructions. Thursday, they will have the jury back in. They will do closing arguments and likely charge the jury. That means read the jury, all the jury instructions. And it will probably go to the jury on Friday. I do not expect that it is going to be a speedy decision, only because there's so much to go over. I could be wrong. We were all wrong in the Murdoch case when it took less than 3 hours. But I think that there's enough for them to go over that probably we'll see a verdict early next week. I don't believe, because death is off the table, the judge is not required to sequester the jury once the case is given to them. So I don't believe the judge is going to sequester the jury for the weekend, and I believe we'll be back on Monday for deliberation. So. Let's take a couple more questions. We're right at the 1 hour mark, and I like to finish up in about an hour. So let's take a couple more. I'm going to do my very best to get that newsletter out where we're going to go over all of the jury instructions and what the state has to prove. So you all be able to read that and to do your own deliberation as the jury's deliberating. So I'm going to do my best to get that out to you all in the midst of wedding week. It's been great fun. And we have a few more little chores to do, but we're pretty much ready. Carol, can the jury come back to watch the sentencing of Lori? Yes. Yes. The judge will tell the jury they are welcome to come back and watch the sentencing. In the Murdoch case, there were several jurors who came back and were there for sentencing. Now, in the Murdoch case, as we saw in Letitia Stout, they went straight to sentencing. And that happened in Letitia's case the same day, which was a little surprising. And then in the Murdoch case, they came back the very next day at 9 a.m. and were ready for sentencing. That is definitely not the way it works here. So, but yes, I'm sure the judge will tell the jury that they are welcome to come back. Now, we don't know the sentencing, because Lori's going to be moved back to Fremont County, awaiting sentencing, awaiting the pre-sentence investigation. We don't know. I'm assuming that sentencing will happen in Fremont County. So what we don't know is whether the court may live stream that sentencing. It would make sense if he's going to live stream the verdict that he live streams the sentencing as well. So let's just take a couple more questions and then we will wrap up. Please email me your questions if I didn't get to them, or post them in the comments. I have been trying really hard to keep up with the comments, even though I've been on the road a bit. But if you feel like you don't want to post your comment in public, email it to me. Does the jury even know that Lori was declared incompetent for trial several times? No, that is not presented to them. Her mental state and the state of her mental health is not at issue, because she has not, unlike Letitia Stout, she has not claimed not guilty by reason of insanity. Yes, I know Idaho doesn't have NGRI, but mental health was not put at issue for her. So the jury did not hear. Do they think that what's been going on in this case is nuts? I guarantee they do. I mean, I was in the courtroom long enough to have seen their faces, and I was there the day they presented all the information about Charles Vallow's death. And to say they were shocked is an understatement. And they've seen a lot of and heard a lot of shocking stuff coming out of this case. So I they're going to think it's nuts, but they're not permitted to consider her mental health. Thanks, Lori and Michelle. You gals rock. Happy wedding week, Lori. Give the happy couple my best wishes. I sure will. I'm having a blast. For those of you who've been following me for a long time, you know, my daughter is my only child, and she is getting married after being she's marrying her college sweetheart. And we're down in the Pasadena area, and the wedding's on Saturday. So we're doing lots of really fun stuff, doing lots of pre-wedding stuff, and just putting together flowers and favors and all that fun stuff that moms get to do. So um, thank you, Kathleen. It's my pleasure because this is important too, and y'all are kind of part of my family too. So I appreciate all your support. We have 1,200 people in chat for this crazy little impromptu chat. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you again, Michelle, for jumping in at the last minute. And I just want to say thanks so much for all your congratulations, and thanks for sticking with me through this. And we just have continued to grow our channel. Couldn't do it without you all. And so I will be back in Boise on Monday, and I will be back to relieve my house sitter, and because the critters are all at home. And so I'll be back on Monday, and hopefully I'll be back for Verdict Watch. So I'm going to say goodnight to you all. Have a great week. We'll update as we can, and look for that newsletter because I'm going to get it out to you. Good night, everybody.